The annual Evans family dinner at Lusk was always a masterclass in silent judgment. Amidst the scent of truffles and vintage wine, my sister Victoria held court, her diamond bracelet flashing with every dramatic gesture. Sterling Corp stock surged 20% after my last proposal, she announced, making sure the nearby tables heard. The board is practically begging me to take over as CFO. Then came the sharp turn. She looked at me with that patronizing smirk. And how's the receptionist life, Emma? Still glued to the phones at that tiny firm? I took a slow sip of water, ignoring my parents' disappointed glances. My simple black blazer, actually a masterpiece of Italian tailoring, felt intentionally plain among their loud designer labels. Quote 3, I said softly, playing the role of the overlooked sister. Victoria let out a mocking laugh. Quote 4, quote 5. Dad added, beaming with pride. Quote 6. I nodded, discreetly checking my phone as it buzzed. The message was cold and final. Acquisition complete. Press release scheduled for 8 p.m. Mom scolded. I murmured, glancing at the clock. It was 7:55 p.m. In 5 minutes, their world was going to shatter. And I was the one holding the hammer. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each second punctuated by Victoria's relentless boasting. She leaned across the table, the candlelight dancing in her eyes, as she reached out to give my hand a condescending pat. Quote 10, she said, her voice dripping with a fake, honeyed sympathy. Quote 11, quote 12, I replied, maintaining a steady gaze. Quote 13. Victoria's posture stiffened for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure, flashing a triumphant smile. Quote 14, quote 15. Dad added, his voice booming with enthusiasm, underscore. Quote underscore 16, underscore I checked my phone once more under the table. 7:58 p.m. The digital clock felt like a countdown to an explosion. Quote 17, I said quietly. Victoria rolled her eyes, let out a sharp, mocking exhale. Quote 18. Quote 19, I countered, my voice becoming a shade cooler. Quote 20. Victoria scoffed, her patience finally wearing thin. Quote 21. My phone vibrated one final time. A news alert flashed across the screen. Wall Street Journal, breaking news. Quote 22. I said, reaching into my leather briefcase and pulling out a heavy, cream-colored manila envelope. Quote 23, quote 24. Mom sighed, looking embarrassed. Quote 25, I didn't answer. I simply slid the envelope across the white linen tablecloth toward Victoria, just as her phone began to chime incessantly with urgent notifications. Her hand, perfectly manicured and heavy with rings, began to tremble as she glanced at her screen. The color drained from her face so fast, it was as if a ghost had walked over her grave. That's impossible, she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time in years. This can't be real. What is it, Victoria? What's wrong? Dad asked. His brow furrowed as he reached for his own phone. The air at the table turned ice cold. Victoria didn't answer. She just stared at her screen as if it were a ticking bomb. Underscore, quote underscore, 29, underscore Victoria, finally stammered, her voice barely audible over the restaurant's jazz music. Quote 30, quote 31, I suggested calmly, leaning back and crossing my legs. I nudged the manila envelope closer to her. Quote 32. Victoria's eyes darted from her phone to the documents inside the envelope. She pulled out the top sheet, her breath hitching in her throat. She read the headline aloud, though it sounded like she was choking on the words, quote 33. The silence that followed was deafening. The crystal glasses on the table rattled as Victoria's hand hit the wood. She looked up at me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Quote 34, quote 35, I replied, my voice now sharp and authoritative. The secretary persona discarded like a cheap coat. Underscore, quote underscore, 36 underscore. I opened the folder to a specific page and slid it directly in front of her. Quote 37, quote 38. Mom gasped, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Quote 39, quote 40, I said, finally letting a cold smile touch my lips. Quote 41. I turned back to my sister, whose fury was now beginning to overtake her shock. Quote 42. The atmosphere at the table shifted from shock to a suffocating tension. Victoria's face transformed from a ghostly pale to a deep, frantic crimson. She lunged for the documents, her movements jerky and desperate. Quote 43, she hissed, her voice a jagged edge. Quote 44, quote 45, I countered, my voice echoing with a weight that silenced the neighboring tables. Quote underscore 46. Dad tried to snatch the papers. His hand shaking, I interrupted. Not yielding an inch, I pulled a secondary file from my briefcase, one bound in a red cover. Quote 50. Victoria stood up so abruptly, her chair screeched against the marble floor, a sound like a dying animal. Quote 51. Quote 52, I asked, tilting my head. Quote 53. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. My phone buzzed with a message from my actual executive team. Security is currently escorting the Sterling board from the building. No incidents, I said, standing up to meet her eyes. The silence at the table was heavy, broken only by the distant, rhythmic sound of Victoria's rapid breathing. She sank back into her velvet chair, her composure completely disintegrated. Quote 56, she whispered, her voice trembling. Quote 57, quote 58, I said, my voice calm but as sharp as a diamond. Underscore, quote underscore 59. Underscore mom reached out, her hand hovering over the red wine that had spilled across the white tablecloth like a growing stain. I corrected gently. Looking her in the eye, I signaled for the maître d'armes. When he arrived, looking concerned at the tension radiating from our table, I handed him my sleek, matte black card, the one Victoria had spent years mocking as a quote 63, quote 64, I instructed. Quote 65. I turned back to Victoria, who was staring at the table, her mascara starting to smudge. Quote 66. As I stood up, adjusting the cuffs of my blazer, I felt a profound sense of lightness. I had spent years being the quote 67 daughter, the quote 68, the quote 69. But as I walked toward the exit, the restaurant staff stood a little straighter as I passed. They knew. The world knew. Outside, the cool evening air of the city hit my face. My driver held the door open for the black sedan, waiting at the curb. I looked back through the glass windows of the restaurant one last time. My family was still sitting there, frozen in time, staring at the empty seat I had occupied. I checked my phone. My schedule for Monday was packed. A board meeting in London, a merger talk in Tokyo, and a restructuring plan for a company that used to be my sister's pride. Success, I realized, wasn't about the diamonds or the titles. It was about the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the girl they thought was just answering phones was actually the one deciding who got to keep theirs. I stepped into the car and disappeared into the glittering lights of the skyline I now owned.